tomorrow is Memorial Day. Depending upon your military connection or your faith tradition or your family rituals, it perhaps means different things for you as compared to others. It impacts you perhaps differently than it impacts me. Growing up on a farm in Iowa Falls, a farm that has been in the family since 1869, 147 years, meant that we made numerous trips to the local cemeteries to bury family members and friends. And it meant that annually we decorated the graves. Last year, as we have for many years, Sue and I sojourned back to our hometown and again participated in the annual ritual of decorating graves. We first gathered just south of town at North Lawn Cemetery with my older sister and her husband who'd come down from Minneapolis. North Lawn is the newest manufactured resting place of souls in our hometown. It came into existence in the late 1950s for the purpose of helping area residents leave this corporeal existence. We gathered there for the first of 3 pauses in the midst of life to remember some of the great cloud of witnesses who'd gone on before us. After locating certain graves and honoring our diverse individual memories by placing token flowers and telling heartfelt stories of each person we'd known, we then caravanned to the next graveyard. Our second stop was at the Friends Cemetery, one of the oldest places of residence and perhaps considered the last home for many who'd grown up on a different side of the railroad tracks in Iowa Falls. In a rock-enclosed family plot going back 5 generations on the maternal side of my family, we visually traced the effects of a smallpox epidemic as it cut down one branch of the family, almost cut down one branch of the family. 4 children out of 6 and their mother died all in the same year. The tragedy was also the cause of a new shoot of genealogy that started when one of the survivors, my great-grandfather, started a new family with his new wife. That quaking branch eventually found me hanging from it. The requisite flowers were anchored above resting souls, and more remembrances of some unique children of God were shared. And the floral parade continued on toward Union Cemetery. Located not on the fringes of the community like the rest of the last two resting places, but prominently planted above the river in the epicenter of town, Union is the physical residence of my paternal kin, going back 4 generations and inclusive of my mother, my father, and my sister. In my spiritual awareness, a graveyard might be the valley of dry bones, but it is not the keeper of the soul's flame. We celebrated the essence of their lives with more flowers, more anecdotes, and a mixture of shared tears, both seen and unseen. During last year's meditation on the past, I was struck with the notion of randomness. Consider, if you will, that if there had been even the smallest of deviations in the way the lives of my ancestors had played out, I would not be. If my great-grandfather Kelsey had not moved from New York to Iowa, my grandfather would not have driven his horse and wagon 10 miles to court my grandmother on Sundays. The horse found its way home on the 10 miles, allowing my grandfather to sleep in the buggy. If my 23-year-old single grandmother McCord had not had an affair with a much older married man, my mother would not have been born. If my father had not liked ice cream and stopped in daily at the East Side grocery, he would not have fallen in love with my mother who was dipping the ice cream. And if they'd not gotten pregnant when she was 16 with my older sister, while Dad was 26, they might not have gotten married. And then where would I be? Choices are made that seem random and full of nuance. Every nuance on the journey is important and has consequences. How we live in the moment is important. Leonard Mlodinow is a physicist and author of several books, including The Drunkard's Walk, How Randomness Rules Our Lives, and Feynman's Rainbow, A Search for Beauty in Physics and in Life. He's a child of 2 Holocaust survivors and someone who's written books with figures as diverse as Stephen Hawking and Deepak Chopra. I would suggest that most physicists will tell you that the math we have right now doesn't really make room for human free will. Fundamental forces of physics somehow determine everything that happens. Some religions will also suggest that free will does not exist, not because of physics, but because they believe that God has determined the outcome before it has even happened. Mlodinow offers a different way of approaching randomness. In an interview with Krista Tippett on her radio show On Being, Mlodinow shared the nuanced way he reconciles his life experiences with modern physics faith in randomness. Here's what he said. I was almost shaken by the realization that I'm, a random effect of something very bad. I'm glad I'm here, but I'm only here because Hitler or the Nazis killed my father's previous family. And that led to my being here. And that was a very hard thing to face, in a way that, what's the meaning of my life when it rose from something like that? And in that story, my father was in the Buchenwald concentration camp, and he stole a loaf of bread from the bakery. And the baker, I guess there were a certain number of people who had access, they lined them all up and brought the guys with the guns. And they said, "Who stole my bread?" And my father didn't say anything. And then they said, "Okay, we're going to start at this end of the line, and we're going to shoot everybody until either you're all dead or the thief steps forward." And so he puts the gun to the head of the first person. So my father, at that point, steps forward and admitted that he stole the bread. And he told me that it wasn't a heroic thing, that he didn't do it out of heroism. He did it purely practical, that these guys were all going to die, and I'm going to die too, or I'll just be the only one. So he stepped forward. And instead of killing him, though, the baker acted like God and somehow, somewhat arbitrarily, took him under his wing and gave him a job as his assistant in the bakery. And so he had a much better job after that, based on that incident. And it just shows you that even in the midst of all this cruelty, there's randomness. Or, I don't know, whim. I don't know if that guy, I don't know if he was being human and let some of his humanity peek out, or he wanted to play like God. I don't really know what was a person's motive, but that's one of the many things that happened to my father. If it had happened differently, I wouldn't be here. And my kids wouldn't be here. And everything would be different in, that lineage. The Drunkard's Walk, which is the title of the book, is sometimes called the Random Walk. And it comes from the idea of a jagged path that particles in Brownian motion seem to take for no apparent reason. In Brownian motion, people look at this in the 19th century. They noticed that little grains of pieces of pollen would jiggle around for no apparent reason in liquid. And they thought at first maybe there was a life force because there was no force on it. Maybe that's what was jiggling, because it's pollen. But they eventually figured out, and Einstein actually is the one who explained it, that this jiggling comes from the impact of the molecules on the pollen, pushing it this way and that. And I saw parallel with our lives, because when you look at your life, if you had to sit down and think about it, and I'm talking about in detail, not just the headlines, if you think about all the details of what happened to you, you will find that there was a time when you had an extra cup of coffee, and where if you hadn't, you wouldn't have met person A. Lot now goes on. Or you probably don't realize that if you hadn't done this, you would have gotten into a car crash, but you didn't because you were a little bit later than the drunk guy who hit someone else or whatever. When I look back in my life, or I look at the life of certain celebrities, I could find so many instances like that. And I had fun tracing some of them. How little things make a big difference. And what they really do is they raise opportunities for you, or they raise challenges. And the course of your life depends upon how you react to those opportunities and challenges that the randomness presents to you. If you're awake and paying attention, you'll find that things happen. They might seem good or they might seem bad at first. You don't know. Or you're wrong about whether it's good or bad. But in time, it becomes clear whether the thing was good or bad. But the important thing is how you reacted to it. Randomness goes on. And so what I'm saying about life is that you don't know a lot, even if you think you do. And you don't have a lot of control, even if you are a control freak. So a lot of things happen to you in the sense that are random, and the same thing with your reaction to it. Yes, maybe a godlike person who knew what the state of all the atoms in your body could tell how you were going to react, but since none of us are that, it doesn't really matter. And you do have a choice, and that determines your life. I definitely think my decisions matter. Now it's more of a philosophical question, I guess, whether I was destined to make that decision. In my life, that question is something to ponder at times, but the effective theory is that yes, if I step off the building, I'm going to fall off the roof, and bad things will happen. And I don't know whether I was destined to decide to step off or not, but I make the decision as if I have a choice. And I think that you have to live your life that way. And no one, whether or not you can argue that theoretically there's a choice or not, no one knows enough to tell you what choice you're going to make. Randomness was a professor of quantum physics. Perhaps you could tell. Every nuance on the journey is important. I would suggest that the significant thing, the deal maker or breaker, is how you continue on in your life when a choice is made. As the Oracle told Neo in The Matrix Reloaded, you didn't come here to make the choice. You've already made it. Now you're here to try to understand why you made it.
Well, come on. I ain't gonna bite you. Come around here and let me have a look at you. My goodness, look at you. You turned out all right, didn't you? How do you feel?
I
know you're not sleeping. We'll get to that. Why don't you come and have a sit this time?
Maybe I'll stand.
Well, suit yourself.
I felt like sitting.
I know. So, let's get the obvious stuff out of the way.
You're not human, are you?
Well, it's tough to get any more obvious than that.
If I had to guess, I'd say you're a program from the machine world. So is he.
So far, so good.
But if that's true, that could mean you are part of this system. Another kind of control.
Keep going.
I suppose the most obvious question is, how can I trust you?
Bingo. It is a pickle, no doubt about it. Bad news is there's no way if you can really know whether I'm here to help you or not. So it's really up to you. Just have to make up your own damn mind to either accept what I'm going to tell you or reject it. Candy?
Do you already know if I'm going to take it?
Wouldn't be much of an oracle if I didn't.
But if you already know, how can I make a choice?
Because you didn't come here to make the choice. You've already made it. You're here to try to understand why you made it. I thought you'd have figured that out by now.
Why are you here?
Same reason. I love candy.
But why help us?
We're all here to do what we're all here to do. I'm interested in one thing, Neo, the future. And believe me, I know the only way to get there is together.
Madeline L'Engle, author of A Wrinkle in Time, expressed it this way. Western man has tried for too many centuries to fool himself that he lives in a rational world. No. There's a story about a man who, while walking along the street, was almost hit on the head and killed by an enormous falling beam. This was his moment of realization that he did not live in a rational world, but a world in which men's lives can be cut off by a random blow on the head. And the discovery shook him so deeply that he was impelled to leave his wife and children, who were the major part of his old rational world. My own purpose to the wild unpredictability of the universe has been to write stories, to play the piano, to read, listen to music, look at paintings, not what the world may have become explainable and reasonable, but that I may rejoice in the freedom which unaccountability gives us. Every nuance on the journey is important, but then you know that. You know it's not the choice that you make that holds the key to your spiritual health, but the way you embrace and celebrate and grow in the moment after the choice is made. Just a thought.